Firstly, thanks a million everyone for turning out tonight. I know it's definitely not easy for people to come to meetings when they're minding kids, particularly when they're minding kids who have additional needs or disabilities. So really thanks a lot for coming. Just to start, I'll introduce myself and outline what I propose to be the format of the meeting, and then we will hand over to our invited guests. So my name is Paul Murphy, I'm a TD for People Before Profit, and the idea for this meeting basically came from the fact that in my office we meet with a lot of parents, a lot of families who are struggling to get the services that their children need. And obviously we give all the help, all the advice that we can to help people, but we also felt that we should try to pull people together if possible, to have a conversation, to give as much information to parents as possible, and to see what can be done collectively as well as individually. So at our top table tonight, we have Andrew Murnaghan, who is a solicitor. Someone said, we had a meeting earlier and he was standing outside. Someone says, the guy who looks like a lawyer outside. So he's the guy who looks like a lawyer at the top table. And Andrew is a partner with KM Solicitors, who specialise in taking cases for parents who are struggling to get their kids what they need. And so they're here today to give advice to people. They'll obviously only be able to give so much advice to questions that are asked from the floor, off the bat, but they'll be able to take people's details and arrange consultations and do whatever can be done in terms of legal routes. And we've also got Pamela Kenny, who is, are you the founder officially? The chairperson of Tallaght Parents Autism Support Group. Probably a lot of people here know Pamela from the work of TPASG. There's a couple of handouts that people may have gotten on the way in. And Pamela, as well as being involved in the kind of work of supporting people, has also become a very active campaigner on this issue. And then we are also joined by Vanessa Murphy, who is also involved in TPASG, but is also one of the campaigners in the Enough is Enough campaign, which is precisely about bringing people together to campaign on these issues. We were meant to have Rachel Martin, who is the founder of FUS, which is another campaign group which organised a series of protests last year. Was quite effective in terms of highlighting these issues, but Rachel sends her apologies. Unfortunately, she's in hospital, she's grand, but obviously she's not able to be here as a result of being in hospital. Just before I hand, so what we'll do is Pamela will speak first, then Andrew, then Vanessa for like 8, 9, 10 minutes, and then we'll go to any questions, ideas, contributions that people have from the floor, and we might, depending on what they're like, we might take a few together and then go back to get answers for people, and hopefully give people more information and more ideas by the end of the meeting, and have an idea of where we're going then when we begin. Just one comment from me before we start, which is that, I think there's just no question that you all, by virtue of being people who have come to this meeting, are being horrendously failed by the state, and your children are being failed by the state. That is just, it's an absolute disgrace. It's very obvious disgrace. It's been called a disgrace repeatedly, but it keeps happening. People are failed in different ways, and their children are failed in different ways. Some are waiting for assessment of needs. That's over 10,000 people, over 100,000 people waiting for over a year for therapy that their children need. Others aren't able to get appropriate places for their children in schools. Some children are, shipped across the city in taxis to other schools, not able to go to schools with their brother or sister, with their friends from their community, others on waiting lists for CAMs. So there's lots of different ways that people are failed by the state, and I think one of the things that maybe works for the state and the government in kind of covering that up is that like different people experience this in different ways. And I think it is important to get into the detail around each of those failures, around why that's happening, but also to look at it from kind of a bird's eye point of view, which is there's an underlying reason why all of these failures are happening, and the underlying reason is a lack of political will, to treat our children with disabilities, our children with additional needs properly, to give the care that they need, to mean that they're not disabled by society, and then linked to that a lack of funding. And that unfortunately was continued in the last budget, where in total 64 million was given extra for disability services, less than 10 million for children's disability services. It's shown in the fact that the government refuses to sign, or well, delays signing, the so-called optional protocol to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the reason they refuse to sign it is because then it would mean that people could actually take cases against the state at an international level. So that's, I think, a certain framework. It's a scandal, but the question is, how can we stop them getting away with it, because they have been getting away with it up until now. So I will hand over to Pamela first. Thanks a million, Pamela, for...
Hi everybody, my name is Pamela, and I suppose I just want to follow on from what Paul was talking about, the extra 64 million that was put into the budget for disability services. We think it sounds like a lot of money, 64 million, but when you actually break it down, of that 64 million, 90 was for new residential places. You think, great, 90 new residential places. The problem was, up until June this year, there were nearly 1,300 new applications for residential places. So we're not even touching the sides of what the current applications are. Then in that 64 million, it was 1,400 new day service places. But the problem is, of the current people and the young people who are in day services, the majority of them are not even doing a full day. They're on a shortened week because they cannot get staff. We cannot run day services if there isn't sufficient staff, and you cannot pay staff minimum wage and expect them to live in this country the way it is. The budget also didn't really outline, it just said further development for respite services and increased PA hours. Up until June this year, there were nearly 2,500 applications for PA or home support hours and overnight respite. We're not going to even we're not even running to stand still at this point. So there was no mention where they're getting the staff to do this. There was no real breakdown of where these new residential and day service places are going to be. The HSE currently outsources 60% of their home care hours. Now, these private providers are given €31 per hour per child or young person for these home support hours. But yet the personal assistant or the home support worker, again, is on minimum wage. Where is the other €15, €16 going? It's going to private companies who are making profits off our children. So we're talking about the CDNT, so the Children's National Network Disability Teams. We have 2 in the Dublin 24 area. We have Enable Ireland in Timon, so basically anything kind of east of the square, up as far as Walkerstown roundabout, in between N7 and N81 type direction. So where are we for Enable Ireland? So they are at a 35% vacancy rate. Out of 19.5 full-time positions, we only have 12.5. And that's for 553 children. So that's 50%, and 50% of that 550 children are on a waiting list. And being on a waiting list means that your child's file is in a box and hasn't been opened. Now, at Chamber House, across the way there, it's one of the biggest CDNTs in the country. They have 1,400 children on their list. So Chamber House covers everywhere from west of the square all the way as far as Rathcoole. So Kilnard and Jobstown, Fettercairn, all included. Now they have 1,400 children, and at the moment they were allocated 31 full-time positions. They currently have 12 staff for those 1,400 children. So at the moment, 880 children's files are sitting in a waiting list without being opened. Now you may think, well, the 600 children whose files are open, are they actually getting services? Unfortunately not. If you only have 12 staff for 600 children, nobody's seeing therapists on a regular basis. You may get parent trainings, you may get seminars, but that's as far as it goes. suppose my last point I kind of wanted to cover is that when you have a fully functional CDNT that has a full complement of staff, their target is to open 5 files every month. That's 5 children being removed from the waiting list every month. So if you were in Chamber House and you're number 480 on that list, it's going to take 8 years for that file to be opened. And that's when you have a full complement of staff, not the 35% staff they have. They have a 65% vacancy rate. Those children's files, there'll be lip service they'll get, unfortunately. It's not going to be a thorough service, it's not going to be what they deserve, and it's not going to be in a timely manner to give the early intervention that those children need. Thank you.
Good evening. So, from our perspective, we're coming at this obviously from a legal perspective, but I think it's very, very important to say at the outset that there kind of needs to be a triangular approach to this whole area, being advocacy from groups right beside me, also protest, and also involve the politicians like Paul and people are actually going to represent families of children with special needs effectively in the Dáil. What we're kind of finding, since we started the firm a couple of years ago, we're finding primarily is a lot of parents are unaware of the statutory rights of their children. There's very, very strong legislation in this country called the Disability Act 2005, which says that anybody who has a concern about their child, that they might have a disability, be it a parent, a public health nurse or an advocate, can ask that child to be assessed. And the Oireachtas has said that the HSE must assess the child within 6 months. There's no budgetary restraints whatsoever. So if mum's concerned about autism, ADHD, any manifestation of any symptom that leads you to believe there might be a condition, it has to be assessed by the HSE. Doesn't matter how much money it costs. And in actual fact, the HSE have said in the High Court that they've no budgetary problems whatsoever in relation to assessing the child. What often happens is that when people find out that they have this opportunity to have the child assessed, they ring the HSE. Sometimes they might ring up, say the child has Down syndrome, and they're told, you have a diagnosis, you don't need to have an assessment of need, when in actual fact that's completely wrong. A child with Down syndrome may have a speech impediment, may have issues that require the intervention of an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist. So the assessment needs to happen, but unfortunately we feel you have to push the envelope, unfortunately, to make it happen. Now, your assessment should take 6 months, but the HSE, as I said, unfortunately don't usually comply with the 6-month criteria, so you have to make a complaint. Up until last year, up until earlier on this year, parents would have a period of time to make a complaint. So it should be completed within 6 months, and you have a further 3 months to make a complaint that it wasn't completed. If that was the case that it wasn't completed, you had to bring a High Court challenge. We actually took a case earlier on challenging that, and now the government is changing the regulations so you can make a standard complaint to under the statutory mechanism rather than go to the High Court. So there are changes happening within the area of disability rights and services, but unfortunately it's taking court action to bring them about. When you get your assessment of need, which we say is every parent with a child with special needs should have it, because it's the gold standard for a comprehensive, accurate and up-to-date assessment of your child. And an important point is, once you do that once, if there's any change in the child, any deterioration, you can go back and ask for a fresh assessment. And that often happens with children with autism over a period of years, that you need a fresh assessment and be brought up to date. But you will get what's called a service statement, which is the government setting out all the services the child needs to address the identified health and education deficits in that report. And that's a very, very powerful document. And that says exactly what the child needs and when they should get it. Now, unfortunately, because of demands in the service, you might get a service statement saying, if you got it today, saying you're not going to get your services until 2026, which you don't have to stop there. You can immediately request that the liaison officer looks at that document and considers reducing that time that the child gets the services, or seek a meeting with the liaison officer. And we've actually forced that in the last 8-9 months to have mums and dads meeting the liaison officers face to face, which wasn't happening before. Then you can request a complaint if needs to be to the HSE in relation to those services. So there are mechanisms to push it, and we are finding that once people get their assessment of need report and service statement and take extra steps, that things do start to happen. Unfortunately, it seems to be that lawyers have to get involved before that happens. We know for a fact that when complaints are put in, unfortunately, by mum and dad on assessment need reports and service statements. Unless they're sent in by a solicitor's firm, they're basically left and they're not touched for a period of time, which is very unfortunate, but that seems to be the reality. But, as I said, these documents that you can get under the statutory rights of the child are massively important. You know, every child will have a GP file, they'll have a public health nurse attached to the child, and then this assessment report up to 17 years old is very, very important. And it seems to be overlooked, and people can often get confused, and understandably so, with primary care, CDNTs and different waiting lists. And you can get bounced from one list to the other with no discernible explanation, and it's very, very hard to get an explanation. But once you have those documents, specifically the service statement, you can get a meeting with the liaison officer who has the power to reduce the time on that document for you to get services, and you actually get to speak to a human being about it. So it's a very, very informative document that each child is entitled to get. Mum and dad are just the medium for the child to actually enforce that right. It's a standalone right of the child. Separate to that, what we're finding regularly is exactly what Pamela was saying, that there's this issue with the services, this issue with CAMs, this issue with waiting lists and school places. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect between CAMs and CDNTs in terms of children and how they should be assessed. If a child has a moderate or severe mental disorder, they should be dealt with by CAMs and services given. Unfortunately, we're finding lots of times that a child has autism and mum or GP suspects there may be ADHD at play. Now, when that child is referred to CAMs, they're told, we can't look at you or deal with the child until you get the services for autism, which is a circular argument because the CDNTs don't have enough staff or are overwhelmed, and then this assessment is not carried out for ADHD. Now, there are actually working protocols, joint working protocols, between CAMs and the CDNTs that the HSE have, and we're actually dealing with that at the moment in terms of going, look, this isn't fit for purpose because it's not working. We have parents having the children referred that are being refused or left on waiting list or given explanations that just don't make any logical sense. So there are different things happening day in, day out in the courts that are actually yielding benefits. But for us, as lawyers, just on this part of the triangle, to get involved and make change, we need parents to actually be getting their assessment need reports and service statements. And then the pressure from advocacy groups and also from politicians to bring about some change. But in the last year, as I said, parents are now meeting liaison officers, which is the first time that seems to have happened, certainly since we're aware of this area. And the regulations are being changed in relation to the complaints, so it stops parents have to take on the worry and the stress, the potential cost of going to the High Court to vindicate their children's rights. They'll be able to actually make a complaint from this October, hopefully the end of this month, going forward in relation to that. So things can change, but I do think it takes everyone here, people like Paul and ladies here in the advocacy groups, to actually effect change. But we're very interested in this area. We opened the firm specifically to deal with it. So we'll be available afterwards if anyone wants to have a chat, or you can leave your details to Isabel. I can take questions whenever you're ready.
Hi everybody, my name is Vanessa. I'm a parent, like all of you there. My son was diagnosed in 2006. I have 4 kids. He's the only one with a disability. I do have some friends with children older with autism, but it didn't really affect me because it wasn't part of my daily life. It wasn't until I tried to get an assessment of need for Adam that I realised the battle that people with children with disabilities face. I was shocked, I'll be honest, I was absolutely shocked. I had him privately diagnosed because I just felt like I need to hit the ground running with this. I need to do everything I can. I was one of those parents, I needed to do everything now, and I couldn't wait for the HSE. So a year to the day, basically, he was diagnosed in 2006, and a year to the day in 2017, the HSE diagnosed him. He has since been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, as well as autism. He's non-verbal. He goes to a special school. He's doing really well. He's a brat sometimes, but he's doing really well. Anyway, in 2017, myself and 2 other parents decided we'd had enough, and we set up Enough is Enough. We campaigned really hard at the start. We then found how difficult it was for carers to actually come out and protest with us. It was like our first protest we did was amazing. We had 26 different protests on the same day, same time, all across the country, and it was amazing. But people just couldn't keep up that momentum. It's hard for parents. It's hard when you're trying to keep going with your everyday life and to try and organise. Like, I don't think people realise, even like a meeting like tonight, to organise and to get people here. Like, I'm so thankful that all of you came out. It's a horrible, dirty night, and the traffic was really bad. So it's great to see such a good turnout. But we need more. Like, we need more people interested in fighting this, because everything is a fight. Every single day you're fighting for something. Like, I'm fighting for respite for the last 4 years. I eventually have a few hours respite coming on the 6th of November, but it's been hard fought 4 years. Why does everything have to be a fight? These are the most vulnerable children in society, and they are forgotten all of the time. Sorry, I did actually have a few notes here, but I'm on a bit of a rant. So we had several meetings with government ministers over the time, and nothing, like, we always felt like we didn't know where to go next. We're trying every avenue to try and, what's the next step? Protests aren't working. Okay, we need to get into the door. We need to get and meet TDs, and we did. But it just seemed to fall on deaf ears. Like, I don't know how we can progress this. I don't know how we can get the government to listen to us. When you were talking about CAMS there, so if anybody does have a child with an intellectual disability and needs the help of CAMS, there's a CAMS ID service which isn't openly promoted. Like, people don't seem to know about it, and I have to say they have been my lifesaver, because my CDNT, I'm Clondalkin based, but my CDNT is not great like everywhere else. But CAMS have been my lifesaver through COVID and through the last couple of years. Without them, I don't actually know where we'd be. But if your child has an intellectual disability, there's a separate CAMS service for that, who they don't, if your child has an autism diagnosis, they don't discriminate because of that. And I know with the standard CAMS, they do discriminate if you have autism, whereas the CAMS ID service won't. So they're based in Cherry Orchard. I can give people the details if they need it. There's also a MEHAL process that I started last May, where it brings anybody that's involved in your child's life together. You need to have somebody that's to process the application for you, to fill it out for you, that's on one of their teams. So luckily CAMS did it for me. What it does is it brings everybody involved in your child, so the school, the CDNT, if there's CAMS, if there's respite, if there's home support, brings all of those people around a table together to work on what's best for your child. Again, that's not something that's openly promoted. Like, people don't know about these things that are there to help. Yeah, but it is part of Tulsa, but it's not something to be feared. They're actually there to help. So that's just something else. Sorry, no. What did I do there? Oh yeah, the AON. The service statement with AON, when you were talking about there's no legal there's no legal obligation for the government, is there, to, sorry, I'm asking you a question now, but there's no legal obligation on a service statement, but there is the legal obligation to do the assessment of need. And again, that's something that they try and transfer you to primary care waiting lists, rather than doing the assessment of need, telling you, you'll get your service quicker. The worst thing you can do is that, because then you've no legal standing. So keep on the AON list, do make the complaint. That's what I did. It took 8 months for them to uphold the complaint, and then I ended up sending a solicitor's letter, and literally 2 days later I got an appointment. So it is definitely worth, if you're still waiting on assessment of need, it's definitely worth talking to a solicitor about it, and just, one letter could actually just start the whole process for you. Sorry, I've just kind of gone off on a tandem here, but yeah, look, that's who I am. I'm a parent. I'm here to try and make things different. All of these children are going to become adults, and as far as I'm concerned, the government are just pushing it down the road. They're pushing the problems down the road. I know my child is going to need full-time residential care. He's never going to live an independent life, and I'm not the only one. So we need to make, and adult services, I don't even want to go there because they're even worse than the children's. But we need to start changing things now for our children, and hopefully by the time they reach adulthood, things will be a little bit better for them and for the kids coming behind us. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Vanessa, Pamela and Andrew, and thanks a million for you coming tonight, because just like it's hard for people here to be in the audience, it's also hard for them to be able to come and then to prepare to speak. Can I also say, if you come up to me at the end, I will get your details and I'll raise it in the Dáil and just be an extra. It's like a solicitor's letter, it's like more pressure on them, just try and do it, so definitely come up to me at the end and I'll get all the details and we'll do that. I want to make one point, and then I know there's people, just like a thing that always strikes me in these conversations and when you go to these protests is like precisely the point I think Pamela was making, that like, you shouldn't have to fight. You know, this is just so unfair, like you've enough on your hands that you shouldn't have to come to a meeting, you shouldn't have to be going to solicitors, you shouldn't have to be sending letters, you shouldn't have to be of course, but like, you all recognise that unfortunately the system is very unjust, and you do, and that's why you're here, is because you are going to fight, because you're going to do everything you can for your kids. And like, I think that is a reality. Like, that isn't right, that isn't just, it isn't how it should be, but it is a reality. It's a reality that you have recognised. It doesn't have to be that way, but like, just in terms of like our role in this as people for profit TDs, like, I would tell you that the Dáil passes very regularly decent motions about these things. All the things we're talking about, the Dáil has passed motions about it. The government is actually super cynical every time a motion is raised, in terms of any of these issues, to say we have to resource them properly, just like everything you can imagine. The Dáil, a motion has been put forward by an opposition party and the government just lets it pass. They don't do anything about it, they just let it pass. Because it's easier for them to let it pass than it is for them to vote against it and have everyone saying, Jesus, you're not in favour of giving children with additional needs the care that they need, you're not in favour of having spaces in schools, you're not in favour of respite care, you're not in favour of residential places, so they just vote for it. And so in and of itself, the truth unfortunately is that getting stuff passed by the Dáil, like, it should make a difference, but again, I'm kind of telling you from my experience is that it doesn't make a difference all by itself. And like, the conclusion I have reached is that like, our impact in the Dáil isn't based on how eloquent we are or how much we shout or whatever. Our impact in the Dáil is based on what's happening outside the Dáil. Like, there's loads of things I talk about in any given week that's very worthy and good and whatever, but nobody notices. The government just ignores it. It just goes away. That's the truth. Like, you know what I mean? Loads of cases of like, what makes things happen is things happening outside of the Dáil and the government feeling pressure. That's when they begin to do some of the things that are passed by the Dáil. It's when they begin to do the things that they're asked questions about. And like, again, that's my point, is that like, none of this is fair. It's not right. It's not right to ask you to go on protests, to be involved in campaigns, to write CDs. That's not right. It shouldn't be the way. But I am telling you that it's my experience that is the only thing that ultimately makes things happen. Like, I remember when we had the 26 protests, I'd forgotten about that actually, it was only you said it, and I was like, Jesus, yeah, like that was such a high point actually, you know, and we were just chatting at the start that you had like a high point of protest around enough is enough, and inevitably people get worn out because you don't seem to get anywhere, and you're dealing with enough on your plate. And then you had kind of another wave like a year and a half ago with Fuss and Rachel Martin, who was going to be here tonight, and you had again protests around the country. I don't think it was 20 something, but it was like 4 or 5 protests around the country, big protests in the Dáil, pressure in the media, but again then it's kind of a wave that goes down again. And I can understand why it feels that like this is just another thing that I'm doing that doesn't seem to work, you know, I completely get that. But I am telling you from my political experience on like a range of different issues that ultimately campaigning pressure, people mobilising, getting it into the media, talking about it, that is the thing that pushes change a lot. And even though the change is slower than it should be, even though it's not right that you should be doing it, like I do, like that makes a difference. It does ultimately make a difference, it really does. So I would say, like, make sure you gave your details. I don't know if there's something to tick to say you're willing to be contacted or whatever, and like we will I think having a conversation between enough is enough and fuss, which is like two different waves of this, to see if can we have another wave? Can we link it to a motion in the Dáil to say you need to ratify the optional protocol, for example? I think that's a very good idea. There's a load of disability groups, it's for everyone with disabilities that affects, who also will be involved in something like that. But just see if we can have another big moment where the government feels the pressure and is forced to do more, because you have this incredible situation where Anne Rabbitte goes to these meetings with HSE and storms a house and she comes to meetings meetings like this, and you would say all these things and she says, I agree, it's terrible, and I believe her, she cries, yeah, and I do believe her. She's not lying, but the government as a government doesn't have the political will to force it through. It's true there's massive obstacles in HSE, and so I don't doubt that for a minute. But if you had a government that was actually committed to dealing with this, and if you have someone who isn't willing to do what's necessary, then they move aside into another position. Do you know what I mean? You could ultimately deal with this, is one thing. Sorry, I've gone on longer than I intended to go on there.
Up in John Knox in City West, they do have a primary school class up there funded by the Home Tuition Grant. That could be a backup option. There's no age limit on that. You can kind of go there. I would say the CNO, it's too early for them to know how many new classes are coming on stream. It was the end of May going into June last year before they were notified that certain schools were actually opening classes for the following September. They released the updated list. I'm very sure it was nearly the first week in June. So it could be as late as that. Not that you want to wait that long, but please don't give up hope. It could still be classes coming on stream. I know exactly what we've gone through. As I said, I've applied to every secondary school south of the Liffey at the moment for my son. When my daughter was going into primary school, like yourself, it was 30, 35, 40 applications went out. And the funny thing is, actually that year she didn't get a single offer, but the following year they all rang me saying, we have a space, but she didn't need it in the end. But I know exactly where you're going to with the amount of applications. It should be a centralised system. We shouldn't have to, for every application, give an original birth cert, their reports, where's my child's privacy, that 30, 40 schools could have the details of my child's reports, intimate details of my birth, and all the details from 0 to 4 years old. They shouldn't have that access to that information. Again, even having proof of address and things like that, I get they need to have it, but it's too much information we're having to give to multiple schools. Their lack of privacy is gone, my privacy is gone. It shouldn't have to be. There should be a centralised system where the CNO can say, you apply to the CNO saying, I need an ASD class place for junior infants for next September, and they then can divide it up. It would save so much money on transport. It was something like 188 million was spent last year transporting children around this country in taxis to get them to their special schools and their special classes. 188 million. What could we do with that money instead of paying private contractors to bus our children out of their community, out of the local area, away from their siblings, their peers, to go to schools elsewhere across the country? And you can guarantee that while a taxi is leaving Tallaght going over to Balliol Meadows, there's probably one from Dunleary coming right the back way across to come to a school over here. It's absolutely bonkers. But I would say with the CNO, keep at them, keep in touch with them. There will be classes coming on board. There definitely will. I would say this time last year I had about 35 parents in TPASG who didn't have a place. It was either for going into junior infants, special schools, or going to secondary schools. Up until now, I only have one person didn't get a place, and that was because the class isn't actually open until November. Everyone got sorted. Now, it was a bit of a lastminute.com on some of them, literally the last week in August, one person found out about a class, but it did happen, so please keep the faith. And if you want to touch base with me in TPASG, we can kind of have a chat about that too.
Just one final thing, just to do with the assessment of needs, you're entitled to a health and educational assessment of need within that report. The NCSE are currently doing the education assessment of needs, and they decide if the child needs to be in an ASD class or would benefit the child. All those reports are fed into a system that's meant to inform the government's strategic planning for schools, for services on an ongoing basis. This is under the Disability Act Section 13. That hasn't been happening properly for years. We actually saw declarations in the High Court last year in relation to it, because the agency aren't properly informing the government. But that's why it's so important that parents with children with special needs do these AONs, because that's a statutory document they cannot ignore, and that they know the data that's there in relation to every single diagnosis, whether it's ASD, Down syndrome, or other diagnoses of mental disorders, that this child is going to have a certain journey through life, and we need to have the structures in place and the services. And we need to have that front and centre, that data, that we can use ourselves as lawyers to vindicate the rights of the child and have the government plan. And just back to the NCSC, there's actually 2 test cases that took place in July in relation to the NCSC doing the educational assessment of need, the educational assessment within the AON report. We'll have a decision out on that probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks in terms of the appropriateness. So there'll be a lot of information coming out into the public domain shortly.
Okay, if people are okay, I suggest we begin to wrap it up. So I'm going to go back. I don't know if you have any more final remarks to make. For example, for you, I think it would be good to say, if people have legal questions at the end of this meeting, who they should talk to.
Isabella over there, take your details, and we're very happy to assist you. Especially the ladies there. The 2 ladies, sorry, to get your names, who are having difficulties with school placements. Just give us your details there, and I'll contact you the next coming days.
I suppose the problem we have is that our government and our systems within, I suppose, the Department of Education, Department of Health, and maybe the NCSC, there is no joined up thinking. The HSE and the Assessment of Need do not notify the CNO that this child has autism, because they don't know what the recommendation will stay for that particular child. The CNO, they do not see, or the NCSE do not seem to plan. If they have a child, for next September 2024, who needs an autism class for primary, they should be putting it into a system that says, right, in 8 years' time, more than likely, going by the statistics, that child will need an ASD class for secondary school. We need to start planning now that we will have capacity for ASD classes at secondary. At the moment, for every 3 ASD classes there are at primary level, there is only 1 at second level. Up until this year, the whole of Dublin 24 only had 1 class. Sorry, last year we only had 1 class. It then moved to 2. We've now got 2 schools with ASD classes. For a population of Dublin 24 that has nearly 78,000 people, we had 18 places for this year. That's scandalous, and they're full. And they're full because no place becomes free until that child graduates in 6th year, for say second level place, or they graduate at 6th class. There is no planning, there is no building capacity in the system, and there's no joint up thinking, and I think that's something we could possibly work on.
Thanks a million, Pamela. People can see Pamela is obviously a mine of information. Actually, this is precisely the thing that the state should have provided, so that people can get access to the information that they need to have. So I hope that is in some way of some use. Then you've got the legal route. Also, in terms of people pursuing their own individual cases, again, feel free to come up to me at the end and I don't want to lie to you and say, if I ask a question in the Dáil, it solves it. It doesn't. That's not the truth. But it can add to pressure. It can sometimes get things moving. So I'm definitely happy to do anything I can. I think this is a particular sort of issue whereby people are unavoidably dealing with their own individual cases, and exactly like Anne was saying, that's all that a lot of people can do, and that's more. You know what I mean? That's more than they should be asked to do. That's 100%. So I hope that out of this meeting there's something useful in terms of individual information that is useful for people in the particular circumstances that they're facing, or that they'll be able to pursue things with the solicitors, get information from Pamela, pursue things with us. But then also the other big question is the whole system, the lack of planning, the lack of resources, the waste of resources that we have heard about, and how we make that change, I think, is a kind of collective question of building pressure on the political system. So if people leave their details, like we don't have something, ideally out of this meeting we would say, okay, in a month's time we're having a protest at the Dáil. That isn't arranged. We just need to talk to people. We need to talk to Enough is Enough, talk to FUS, try and maybe have some more meetings like this in other parts of the city, in other parts of the country, to try and bring people together to get a kind of critical mass. But I commit to people to come back to you, like within the next month, with hopefully an outline of a plan or an idea of a plan of like, okay, these are things that are going to be coming up, these are things that are worth doing, these are things in terms of trying to rebuild the political pressure on the government. Because I think to the extent that people can, and like 100% understand some people can't, but to the extent that people can, I think that is important stuff, and we need to try and mobilise people who also aren't individually affected, who therefore have a bit more time but are rightly outraged at how the state is failing children. So thanks a million everyone for coming, thanks in particular for our speakers and the other from KM Solicitors who came along to participate and take people's details, and really fair play to all of you. And